Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, as the case may be for those in Asia. We're very happy to welcome you to the Europe and Asia launch of the World Benchmarking Alliance's Global Corporate Digital Inclusion Benchmark, the first ever to be created for the digital sector. We have this morning or afternoon a very exciting set of speakers, multi-stakeholder from across the industry, from government as well as from investors. And we hope that you can participate actively in the chat. We have the research team around, led by Michael Minguez, and our team of research analysts will be on the chat to answer your questions. So please feel free to ask questions, to express comments and ideas and suggestions for a way forward as well. So we will try to answer to the best of our abilities. But just some housekeeping note, please don't forget to mute yourself so that there are no interruptions during the session. But we will also be recording, and we hope that you can share this on your social media and through your networks. For our hashtags, please use hashtag DIB2020. That's Digital Inclusion Benchmark 2020, or hashtag digital inclusion when you are sharing. So feel free on LinkedIn, Twitter, share your thoughts and comments. We'll start with very fitting remarks from the Vice President of the Asian Development Bank. Then we will proceed to our moderated panel. But first, I would like to thank our co-hosts. We're very excited to bring this event to you through our cooperation with the GSMA. The GSMA, as you know, is the leading mobile industry association globally. And I would dare say one of the reasons for why the telecommunications industry is probably leading on digital inclusion through a lot of their efforts on digital inclusion. So we're very happy to co-host this event with GSMA. And our another co-host, of course, very close to our hearts, is the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy at the National University of Singapore. We are very happy to welcome both co-hosts. Thank you very much. And we can start with the remarks from ADB's Vice President for Sustainable Development and Knowledge Management, Dr. Bambang Susantono. Dr. Bambang is responsible for managing knowledge in ADB and coordinating research on various topics such as energy, transport, education, and health. So the video might be a little not as good quality, but I'm pretty sure that the content is really good. So, Matt.
Honorable Minister, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Asian Development Bank, it is a great pleasure for me to join all of you today in the launch of the Corporate Digital Inclusion Benchmark. Asia and the Pacific has navigated uncharted territory as we grapple with the COVID-19 pandemic and its many effects. The process of easing lockdown has met many challenges, including questions on how the virus will ultimately be contained and how our societies will recover. But as we adjust to the realities of this evolving next normal, one thing is clear: a return to business as usual is unimaginable in Asia and the Pacific, a region that was already off track to meet the SDGs, our Sustainable Development Goals, even before the pandemic struck. Our region's economy are at risk of further losing momentum on specific SDGs. For example, gender equality, as envisioned in SDG 5, 3 times more young women than men have not been educated or trained, as is their right. The pandemic has worsened existing inequalities in other aspects too, like access to education. These inequalities have been compounded by the large digital divide, the uneven access to information technology. So given these realities, it is crucial we bring everyone together to narrow the digital divide and build greater digital inclusion. The benchmarking report we launched today helped tech companies identify opportunities for making a difference and points out existing weaknesses to be fixed. I see the cornerstones of any corporate strategy on digital inclusion as follows. First, enhancing universal access. Second, improving all levels of digital skills. Third, mitigating risk. And fourth, promoting open, inclusive, and ethical innovations, the dimensions of the benchmark. The results shared today will show the challenges ahead for the tech companies to be fully part of the global ambitions to achieve the SDG through shaping our digital future. Yes, the Asia and Pacific region has made great strides in closing infrastructure gaps, upskilling its citizens, and is in the process of building smarter, more livable, and interconnected cities. Yet, despite the vast majority of Asians with access to digital connectivity, billions still lack the ability to tap the digital economy, digital health, or digital educations. We clearly still have a lot of work to do, and expanding network infrastructure or enhancing digital literacy will not be enough. We also need better access to affordable devices, tools, services, and content. This must be accessible in local languages, offering concrete ways to improve life and livelihoods, and none of this can be achieved without sound policies. Policymakers and businesses must work together. I applaud the World Benchmarking Alliance for highlighting the role and leadership of the private sector in addressing these challenges. We need to bring everyone on board if we are to successfully navigate and emerge from this crisis. It is crucial we reach as many of our citizens as possible when providing public health advisories, tracing infections, and tracking essential supplies, whether food or vaccines. The rapid rise this year in new tech businesses like e-commerce platform already shows the importance and the responsibility this industry will hold for the future. ADB is deeply committed to supporting the pandemic recovery and sustainable development in our region. In April, we announced the pandemic response package of $20 billion. Through this, we have helped provide financing and technical support to social protection programs, digital readiness assessment for educations, and supply chain finance for small and medium-sized enterprises. Looking ahead, one of our priorities will be on the effective distributions of vaccines among our developing members in an inclusive and equitable manner. Digital technology holds tremendous potential for mapping supply chains and the distribution channels that are needed to administer vaccines. They will also be used for tracing any harmful effects and guiding their proper use. Honorables, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, digital inclusion can help us tackle this global challenge and keep people safe. I'm hopeful that increased awareness for digital inclusions among influential tech companies will help us generate new partnerships and promote ethical business practices. Let us all work together to address the digital divide that was exacerbated by the pandemic. Thank you.
We are also, of course, looking forward to working closely with ADB on promoting and advancing digital inclusion across the Asian region. I'm now very excited and very happy to present the digital inclusion benchmark results for 2020. As I've said, this is the first ever benchmark to look at the performance of the digital sector in terms of what they're doing on digital inclusion. Let me take a moment to share my screen. Before I dive into the results, just like to let everyone know that the full ranking and the scores and ranks per measurement area are already available online. It will be shared to you all in the chat, so feel free to explore the results and find out how different companies are doing in different parts of the world and in different industries in the digital sector. But before I go into the results, I think it's good to give context within the wider work of the World Benchmarking Alliance to understand our approach and where we are coming from. The World Benchmarking Alliance is a global initiative that was created to incentivize and more corporate efforts towards sustainable development. So it was built essentially to provide a movement and to create incentives for the corporate sector to do more towards the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals. So the goals are our starting point and the inspiration for essentially what we do. But then we realized that to achieve the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals, we need to actually transform whole systems. And it's not enough to just zero in on a specific goal because everything is interconnected. So industries and companies are selected according to their influence and role within the system that is closest to their core business. Together with stakeholders, we identify companies, develop methodologies, undertake the benchmark research, and hopefully from this, have the data that can be used by stakeholders, empower them to advocate for more digital inclusion, whether they are government, whether they are civil society, whether they are investors, and most especially whether they are the companies themselves. And finally, we hope that through this, we create a very positive race to the top for a better world together. So that's essentially what we do as an organization. We are now in the thick of developing many different, we are now in the thick of developing many different benchmarks across what we call the 7 systems transformation. At the heart of the systems transformation is, of course, the social transformation, where we need everyone on board to look at labor rights and human rights and issues such as corruption and taxation and lobbying. And we are very happy to announce that by next year, we hope to be able to already release core social transformation indicators across 1,000 companies and across the digital sector as well. That lies at the heart of the 7 systems transformation. And then around those transformations and really empowering and getting it going is the financial system. So nothing happens without the financial system on board. So there will also be an upcoming benchmark for 400 of the world's largest banks, asset owners, and asset managers. So that should be something exciting to watch out for. Of course, we have already existing benchmarks in decarbonization and energy for the automotives, utilities sector, spotlight benchmarks under the food and agriculture transformation for the seed industry and the seafood industry, and upcoming benchmarks for the entire food and agriculture industry. The baseline report is coming out as well in a week's time. So that's also something to look out for, 350 of the world's largest food and agriculture companies. And of course, our focus today is the digital sector and how the digital sector can move towards more digital inclusion. So the World Benchmarking Alliance is essentially benchmarking 2,000 companies across the globe. We call this the SDG 2000. The SDG 2000 are the most influential companies towards sustainable development. And we acknowledge the support of our funders, without which our work is we are able to keep our work free and publicly available to the support of multiple governments from the European Union to the Danish government, Sweden, the United Kingdom, Germany, the Netherlands, and many foundations from Aviva to the Walton Foundation, Porticus Laudis, and IKEA Foundation. So we are very thankful for that support, keeping the World Benchmarking Alliance a public good. Of course, data is only data if that's not used. So the point about data is to build a movement around data, a movement of stakeholders who are willing to use and advocate based on the findings and the results of the various benchmarks for all the 7 systems. We now have more than 180 allies, and it's growing every day. For a full list, visit our website. Our financial institution allies are also growing, not only in number, but also in assets under management. So that's also something that we hope will drive even more change in all these 7 systems. The reason for why we need to actually transform the digital system, we all, from the pandemic, found digital inclusion to be a very personal issue. So it's no longer something abstract. It's something that we face every day as we become more and more dependent on digital technologies and digital services. So we are one of the lucky few who are now here participating in the call using digital technologies, but there is billions, half of the world's population, who actually do not have access to any of what we are privileged to encounter in our daily lives. They have no internet connectivity, for example, to begin with. So there's still a lot to be done. The system for producing, distributing, and consuming digital technologies is essentially broken. There's massive inequality and there's lots of risks and harms. So we really need a digital system that is trustworthy and secure and that leaves no one behind. And that's why we need to look at the contribution of the private sector, that such contribution is actually quite immense. And as we always say, with great power comes great responsibility. So what is the corporate sector doing to help governments, especially, reach their digital inclusion objectives? So the digital inclusion benchmark was created precisely for that reason. As we have said, is the first ever global corporate benchmark for the digital sector. It will track the performance of 200 digital technology companies by 2023. This year, we start with 100 companies. Next year, it goes up to 150 until we reach 200 companies by 2023. Each company is assessed on 4 measurement areas: access, skills, use, and innovation. What that means is we look at whether they are enhancing universal access to digital technologies, whether they are improving all levels of digital skills, whether they are fostering trustworthy use by mitigating risks and harms, and whether they are ensuring open, inclusive, and ethical innovation. So this conception of digital inclusion is actually quite broad, and it's important to think of inclusion as something comprehensive, that it covers the principle of leaving no one behind, but it also covers the principle of making sure that no one is harmed or injured by digital technologies, because risks and harms prevent everyone from equally benefiting in the digital economy. So there are 16 indicators across these 4 measurement areas of access, skills, use, and innovation. This tracks how companies are helping advance a more inclusive digital economy and society, and the indicators reflect the cross-cutting impact and interconnectivity of the SDGs. So who are the companies that are being ranked and scored? We call them the DIB 100. So if it's a good term to remember, the DIB 100. These are the companies with disproportionate influence on the structure and function of the digital system. They're quite huge, over 3 trillion in 2019 revenues and 8 million employees. they're very varied. So we cover both publicly listed as well as privately held companies. So we have 7 privately held companies, 15 companies also with state ownership across the entire digital sector. So we have hardware companies from semiconductors to telecommunications network equipment manufacturers, the telecommunication service providers themselves, and the software and IT services, which include the giant platforms of which we use and are familiar with for everyday life. All these companies have a global reach through whether they are headquartered and through their subsidiaries. So that means that they reach the global population and can impact the whole world. The breakdown by companies, we've assigned China and the United States a separate region by themselves due to the number of companies coming out of those 2 countries. Then we have the rest of Asia, excluding China. That's where Australia, no, I forgot exactly if we put Australia in Asia or it's in other. But in the other region, we have Africa and Latin America. And then, of course, we have Europe. And that's how this is all broken down. Most of the companies, of course, are from the telecommunication service industries, but we have a close number from software and IT services and the least number from hardware. So this is the top 10. So if you're curious, the full results are already on the bench on the website. So please feel free to explore. You can filter by region, by industry, and by measurement area if you want to see who is leading according to those different categories. So globally, what we found through a year of research and engagement with all the 100 companies is that these companies are the ones who performed well. And the common theme among all these companies is that they performed well on all 4 measurement areas. So being a digital inclusion leader meant that they took a comprehensive approach to digital inclusion. They looked at access, they looked at skills, they looked at trustworthy use, and they also looked at open, inclusive, and ethical innovation. So we have these top companies, which we congratulate. 2 of them are in the panel joining us to share their experiences and why they have put in such effort towards digital inclusion. The industry, unfortunately, is still very far off. Average score for all the 100 companies is only around 0.70 out of 2. The scoring is out of 2, equivalent to around 35%. So the industry as a whole still has a long way to go to embrace digital inclusion as a core responsibility of the industry. The top 10 is very diverse. As you notice, they come from different countries and different regions, from Asia, from the United States, from Europe. And what they do have in common, and what we found is missing from the top 10, are the software and IT services. And we will remark on that later on in one of our key findings, which is that among the 3 parts of the digital sector, we are finding the software and IT services are really lagging behind telecommunications as well as hardware. So the telecommunications sector are leading insofar as their embrace and adoption of digital inclusion as their core responsibility. And software and IT services still have a long way to go. And therefore, we would see that that sector, and especially, for example, our online platforms, still need to do some adulting. So we always talk about growth and growth stocks and growing. And the technology sector is obsessed about growth metrics. But what we are also forgetting is that we also need to be obsessed about growing up. So there's a need for software and IT service companies to grow up. And we feel from our data that the reason, perhaps one of the reasons, is that they are also relatively young. having only been established after the commercialization of the internet, after the invention of the World Wide Web, compared to telecommunications and hardware companies who have been there for quite some time already. The average age of the top 10 is 75 years, I believe, and that gives them a lot of time to mature into responsible corporate citizens. So this is a challenge to the software and IT services, because from the data we can see that it's not about size at all. It's not about how big the company is. So for example, Amazon, we all know, is the largest in revenues, 280 billion, but they are in the bottom half of the benchmark. So if we were to follow the principle of with great power comes great responsibility, then we expect a lot more from the largest companies to perform a lot better and do a lot more on digital inclusion. So that's the challenge from the key findings of the benchmark data. The second key finding is we're seeing that skills are a bit behind. There need to be clear and consistent support for digital skills. So the 4 measurement areas, it's digital skills that companies have put the least consistent efforts, especially when it comes to upskilling women and girls. So there's a need for work on digital skills that actually is more transparent about company contributions, is more transparent and open about third-party evaluation impacts, and to do skills programs and skills efforts in a more systematic way. So that is essentially what is missing. And then another thing that's quite alarming is ethics. We are seeing that half the companies in the benchmark have some kind of senior level oversight for ethical issues. The focus, however, of this oversight is on more traditional ethical issues such as corruption and bribery, which we applaud and are necessary for all companies. But for the digital sector, it's not enough. They need to go beyond these traditional issues and consider ethical issues related to digital technologies itself. So we are finding, for example, that only 16 of the 100 companies have an ethical policy for artificial intelligence. So ethics requires an update urgently. This is not a very extreme ask. It's just asking companies to have a group level commitment to undertaking and following ethical considerations when they're doing research and development, when they are developing technologies such as artificial intelligence. So that's the least that the world can expect from these companies. And unfortunately, of those 16 companies, most of them are the telecommunications companies and not the software and IT service companies, which we would expect given their massive use of big data. Finally, another alarming finding is on online child safety. And we will be joined later on, of course, by UNICEF in the panel, and we will hear more about it. But this is a very alarming finding, given that we all understand children to be one of the most vulnerable users of digital technology. Not only are they the most vulnerable, but they are also often the first adopters. They are driving, literally, the growth of the digital sector. But they are also one of the most neglected. So we found, for example, that only 16 out of 100 of the digital technology companies made a high-level commitment to child online protection. That's not even asking them much, except to make sure that a very high level at the company, someone is accountable, they are committed to making sure that children are safe online. or when using digital technologies. It doesn't matter whether you're a hardware company, a telecom company, or software and services company. We all know that digital goods and services are all interconnected and do not function without one or the other. So the entire sector has a role to play to make sure that children are protected. If they all do their share, then there will be more awareness and more resources going into this. So we applaud the efforts that the UNICEF is already doing, and we hope that companies partner more, for example, with organizations like UNICEF to tackle this issue. And finally, we found that leadership across the benchmark, global best practice, global leadership, means that a company is staying ahead of the regulatory curve. It's not enough to just say we are complying with this particular jurisdiction. It's really, if you want to anticipate risks for the company down the road, it means that you take a principled approach to the different issues and apply them not piecemeal, but systematically across your entire organization globally, using the most advanced, the most stringent standards on the issue. That's not that is an expectation of the world to the digital sector. We are finding a lot of variances, for example, on privacy practices, on cybersecurity practices, for example, where companies are reacting instead of staying ahead of the regulatory curve. The benchmark is an opportunity for the entire sector to prove that they can regulate themselves together as a group and to show that they will be improving their performance in the years to come. We will have a 2021 benchmark and a 2022 benchmark. Without that progress, there will be increasing need, and there already is. We are seeing governments already stepping in, rightly so. There will be increasing need for more regulation of the sector unless the sector is able to show that they are able to regulate themselves. So this is a challenge for the digital sector. And finally, I urge everyone to join us in this journey. Data is only data unless we use it. So for companies out there, we urge all of you to coordinate and harmonize your actions to accelerate digital inclusion by joining the benchmarking journey. Proud to say that around half of the companies are actively engaged in the benchmarking process, but we're missing the other half. And those could be an important group of companies as well. So we hope that they awaken to the call for digital inclusion. The other call we would like to make to our audience and to everyone out there is to join us in a multi-stakeholder collaboration for a decade of delivery. Governments, investors, civil society, let us rally around the benchmark's findings and advocate for inclusive digitalization. Share in social media, #DIB2020, get in touch with us by email. And of course, here is the link, explore, use, and share the data. Thank you very much. I end there. I'll bring in Professor Ed Araral from the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, National University of Singapore, to moderate our panel. Professor Ed?
Okay, thank you very much, Lourdes, and congratulations on putting together the first Digital Inclusion Index. Very striking results. I hope the index would be able to nudge the companies and get them to some action. Again, congratulations. We have assembled a diverse group of panelists this afternoon. We have representatives from industry associations, GSMA, from Telecom, Orange. We have representatives from financial services, Fidelity International, from academia, from the National University of Singapore, and of course from the United Nations system represented by UNICEF. Let me start off with the representative from GSMA, Max Cavalier. Max is the head of Mobile for Development at GSMA, which is an industry organization that represents the interests of telecom networks, more than 750 of them worldwide. Max, the question for you is, why is digital inclusion important to the mobile industry?
Thank you very much for having me, and thanks a lot for the question. I'd like obviously to start by congratulating the World Benchmarking Alliance on the work of creating this benchmark, and something Lourdes was mentioning, in also involving the ranked companies at multiple steps along the process, which is really best practice in this type of exercises. As you were saying, as the GSMA will represent over 750 mobile operators, including Telstra and Orange, who will be speaking later, as well as more than 400 companies in the broader ecosystem that jointly contribute over $4 trillion to the global GDP. And as you can imagine, further advancing digital inclusion goes to the core of everything that we do. So going to your question, why is digital inclusion so important to the mobile industry? Well, mobile operators have traditionally held a very strong position in driving local digital growth. And they are leading efforts on digital inclusion, especially in low and middle income countries. So we're really pleased that this benchmark is reflecting that really well. In terms of the importance of what's been created, the reality today is that if you look at OECD countries, 95% of individuals use their smartphones as their favorite device to access the internet. And if you look towards low and middle income countries, almost 60% of those who are using the internet access it exclusively via their mobile. So I think that outlines quite well the importance that the industry is playing there. And I mean, this goes from very significant investments on infrastructure, and on which the vast majority of citizens today across the world depend to go online. So thanks to these investments, both in the expansion, but also in upgrades and maintenance of broadband networks, the world today is more connected than ever. And I think it's worth looking at the work that's been done so far. We've got 93% of the world population that is now covered by at least 3G. And in the past 5 years alone, it's close to 1 billion people that have newly been covered by mobile broadband. In the next 5 years, mobile operators will be spending another $1 trillion in expanding, maintaining, upgrading their network. And this is a direct consequence of the fact that mobile data use is booming. I think across the world, we expect between now and 2025 a growth fourfold of usage. And in some geographies, like if you look at Africa, for instance, you're looking closely to like a tenfold increase in the next 4 or 5 years. So if you look at this from an infrastructure point of view, it's obvious that mobile operators are advancing digital inclusion. But I want to say that there's an increased focus on accelerating mobile internet adoption and usage, because it's not just about connecting people. We still have, and I think that number was in the initial presentation, even if a little bit blurry, 3.4 billion people who have access to a network. They are living under a tower, but remain offline. And I think only by increasing adoption and usage, we can realize the full potential of digital for all, which will also, in return, ensure that mobile operators can continue to invest in the infrastructure that's needed. And I want to say that obviously the lack of adoption is a challenge in all markets, but it disproportionately affects women, lower income populations, rural communities, persons with disabilities. Today, 90% of that usage gap that I was mentioning earlier, the 3.4 billion citizens, is in low and middle income countries. And if you look at specific population, the gap widens when you look at rural area, for instance. In low and middle income countries, someone in a rural area is 37% less likely to use mobile internet than someone who lives in an urban area. If you look at gender, for instance, women in low and middle income countries still are 20% less likely than men to use mobile internet. And I mean, this is looking at a statistic, but if you look at a number, it means 300 million fewer adult women than men who use mobile internet today. This needs obviously to be addressed. And finally, I mean, it kind of there's a multiplier effect for populations who are at the intersection of vulnerable groups that do suffer a compounded digital exclusion effect. We looked at Bangladesh, for instance, where women with disabilities are 66% less likely to own a mobile phone than a man without disability. So if we want to overcome this challenge, we see mobile operators focus on improving device affordability, for instance, but obviously invest in local digital ecosystem to create content, new services, as well as implement digital skills program. And as was just presented by Lourdes, digital skills consistently rank as the top barrier for individuals that own a device and are aware of mobile internet, but not using it. So this is why it needs to be addressed in priority.
Thank you, Max. I have a follow-up question for you quickly for 1 to 2 minutes. How can the index created by Lourdes support GSMA's commitment and actions towards digital inclusion?
Yeah, I think any efforts to strengthen the visibility and the recognition of the private sector efforts and role in advancing digital inclusion is critical. I think that what Lourdes said is that to make the top of the list, you basically need to take a comprehensive approach and be good on each of the 4 areas and each of the criteria. And the initiative that mobile operators undertake with our support actually show the commitment of the sector to transparency and to impact. And they will cover like all of these areas. This is gender. We work with mobile operators on committing to reducing gender gap. It's digital skills. It's addressing child protection online as well. And I think the digital benchmark will really benefit those efforts in providing kind of external validation that these areas are key priorities and will enable us to work with mobile operators to make sure that they keep performing really strongly on all these.
Thank you very much, Max, and thank you for supporting this project, and may you continue to supporting this in the years forward. Thank you. Our next panelist comes from the Telstra Group. Telstra is the one largest telecom providers in Australia. Lyndall Stoyles is Telstra's Group General Counsel and Group Executive Legal, Regulatory, Government, and Sustainability Officer. So, Lyndall, the question for you is, why is digital inclusion a strategic driver for Telstra, and why do you think you rank #1 globally? And congratulations, by the way.
Thank you, Professor. Can I just check that you can all hear me?
Yes.
Yes, very good. Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening for those of you who may be joining from Australia. That is where I'm joining from, and I would like to acknowledge the First Nations Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of the land from which I'm joining you today. And it's really great to be here and be part of the launch of the 2020 Digital Inclusion Benchmark. I'll share a couple of thoughts that we've had, which have really been touched on already, but I'll take a particular Australian perspective to them. And so I wanted to start by saying that on behalf of Telstra, we really wanted to say that we're honoured to be named as the leading company in this year's benchmark. And I would like to thank the World Benchmarking Alliance and partners for the opportunity to be a part of this important discussion. At Telstra, we see the business really has an important role to play in achieving the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. But this can really only be done by working with governments and the communities that we operate in. We see technology as an enabler of action on these goals, and we know that digital technologies are essential for keeping people connected, but we also recognise that these very technologies that can actually magnify existing divisions and worsen economic and other inequalities. Our role as a significant Australian business is reflected in our sustainability strategy, which is aimed at helping everyone thrive in a digital world, not just those in metropolitan cities, but everyone thrive. It includes initiatives and targets to address our Sustainable Development Goal priorities, and these include gender equality, economic growth, innovation, and climate action. And our sustainability strategy is really a core component of Telstra's overall purpose, which is to build that connected future so everyone can thrive. I think it's fair to say, and it's been said many times during 2020, that digital inclusion has never been more relevant than it has been this year. When we look back on the year, we remember it as a year in which there was a profound shift in the way people connected with each other. As the COVID pandemic forced us out of shared and public spaces, we looked for new ways to connect with each other. And in Australia, we've seen more digital adoption in the last 8 months than in the previous 5 years. I'm sure many of you have had similar experiences, but just to give you a sense of what we've seen in Australia, peak data traffic on our fixed network increased by as much as 70% at the height of pandemic as people moved to work and study from home. The peak time for internet use at home shifted from 9 p.m. to 4 p.m. And we've seen upload traffic increase by more than 50%. For Telstra, we ran more than 8 million Microsoft Teams calls in July, which was a 500% increase on pre-COVID levels. And a lot of these changes will remain. A recent survey of our employees showed that they now plan to only go into the office for no more than 2 days a week, and that's even after all of the COVID restrictions are lifted. The upshot of all of this is business has changed dramatically, and we don't think it's going back. We're also conscious that this transformation is happening in a context for us where 2.5 million Australians are still not online, and that's around 10% of our population. And these people are at risk of being left behind as the scope and pace of digitisation increases. The pandemic has and will continue to have highly differentiated social and economic impacts. So for some Australians, we've seen the associated rapid digitisation having a really positive impact, as it provided the impetus to a lot of people that they needed to learn digital skills for the first time or to seek better connectivity. For others, it may result in greater exclusion as connectivity becomes beyond their reach, either due to affordability or simply not knowing where to start or having the skills to know how to use that connectivity. Telstra's been focused on the issue of digital inclusion for a long time. Since 2014, we've worked with local universities, RMIT and Swinburne, to bring together the Australian Digital Inclusion Index. And this index provides a really comprehensive picture of our online participation over time and across 3 different dimensions. Those dimensions being access, affordability, and digital ability. The index provides the evidence that we need and organisations need to inform and promote public policy and program responses in Australia. And these are used to enhance digital inclusion and measure the effectiveness of programs. We use the index to inform our priorities and how we invest in products and services to improve inclusion. And our priorities include improving access to connectivity by investing across all of Australia. And this is where we have a particularly unique challenge. So our network reaches 99.5% of the Australian population, and that covers 2.5 million square kilometres. However, the remaining 0.5% of the population are spread across the remaining 5 million square kilometres that is Australia. For context, that's about 1.25 million people across an area that's quite a bit larger than the entire European Union. Our second priority is to build digital capability in customer cohorts such as seniors and our Indigenous Australians. We've got multiple partnerships with state governments and not-for-profit organisations to deliver a number of significant programs that help build these skills. We're also focused on affordability and helping people on low incomes and those facing financial hardship to stay connected and designing low-cost plans for our most vulnerable customers. One thing I did want to mention though, and we have recognised, is that for an organisation as large and complex as ours, we don't always get it right. And last week we reached a settlement in a pretty significant case for Australia, where we ended up paying a significant penalty and agreed to ongoing obligations after we discovered that there was unconscionable conduct taking place in some of our partner stores operating under a Telstra licence. These licensees had been selling mobile phones and devices into Indigenous communities to people who couldn't afford them, and the devices weren't appropriate for their needs. We at Telstra didn't pick the issue up quickly enough, nor act quickly enough. And the case really tells us that we've got a lot more to do to deliver on our purpose and our sustainability strategy. We're focused on doing this and building the trust with our customers and operating responsibility. So it is extremely disappointing when things go this wrong. So in closing, the digital divide is essential for social and economic well-being and future prosperity. However, increased digital inclusion is complex and a challenging issue, and it's something that we see as we all need to work together in order to make this significant change. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you, Lyndall, and congratulations again for making it at the very top. And I think your candidness is part of that culture. I have one last question for you quickly. How can Telstra utilize its top rank position in the benchmark to influence the transformation of the digital sector?
Thank you. So digital inclusion is a really complex issue, and we see that it's something that requires collaboration across business, government, and society more broadly. And that's why when we're looking at our digital inclusion, rather than doing it all on our own, we partner with on-the-ground community organisations who design and build the programs and help us ensure that the programs are implemented, focusing on the right things and doing it in the right way. And we often partner with a number of universities and education institutions in Australia to build those skills for the future. In addition to that, we also co-invest with government and business to achieve scale in the delivery of our program. And we work with government to ensure that the needs of those who are currently excluded are also considered in policy decisions of government. So as I mentioned earlier, we've achieved more in the last 8 months in response to the COVID pandemic than we had in the previous 5 years. We think what is critical now is that we leverage this momentum, but we also think it's equally important to balance it with investment in programs that mean all Australians can share in the opportunity of a digital economy.
All right. Okay, thanks again, Lyndall, and congratulations, and we wish you luck as you nudge forward the rest of the tech companies. Again, thank you and congratulations.
Professor Ed, sorry to interrupt, but perhaps we can go with Professor Tan next. I believe he might be chasing another thing on the schedule. Okay,
our next panelist is my boss, our president at the National University of Singapore, Professor Tan Eng Chai, is the president of NUS. NUS is the largest and oldest, and I would say one of the most innovative universities in Asia. Professor Tan, over to you, please.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much, Eduardo. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Congratulations to the World Benchmarking Alliance for the unveiling of the inaugural Digital Inclusion Benchmark. As digitization gains momentum, every sector of society will be impacted. Universities also have an urgent responsibility to re-envision education, research, enterprise, and even university operations. We must avoid the future where digitization results in fractured and highly unequal societies. Instead, we shall build purposely towards a future where nations and communities continue to be vibrant, dynamic, and inclusive. I believe there are several ways in which universities can play an important role as catalysts and digital enablers. Now, the first is by transforming institutions into lifelong learning institutions. Universities will have to shift their focus from a pre-employment training model to one embracing a large component of continuing education and training. This will greatly expand learning opportunities across society and ensure that workers and industries stay dynamic and relevant. Digitization can also be a key tool for learning and training at scale, speed, and low cost. The second measure is to ensure that research advances benefit society as a whole. To tackle complex challenges such as technological disruption, we need integrated and holistic interdisciplinary solutions that encompass both technological and humanistic dimensions. A third aspect would be to promote digital literacy. Within a university environment, this means like everyone, faculty, students, and staff, will need to develop confidence and skills in areas such as basic AI, data analytics, and quantitative reasoning. Such competencies will allow universities to pursue organizational excellence by redesigning processes, lowering costs, and increasing efficiency and effectiveness through database decision-making. So through careful planning, Singapore has set in place key national initiatives such as the Smart Nation concept, Skills Future, and economic restructuring that promotes equitable growth and digital inclusion. And as the nation's flagship university, we are also boldly reinventing ourselves for a digital future, while upholding key commitments such as broad access to quality education and also promoting a vibrant and cohesive society. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Tan. Thank you for your time. Our next speaker is from the UNICEF. Karin Hulshof is the Regional Director for East Asia and Pacific, and she's responsible for 14 country offices around the region. Karin, my question for you is, what are your reflections on the role of digital companies in protecting the world's children and supporting them to fulfill their potential? Karin?
Thank you. So first of all, heartfelt thank you to the World Benchmarking Alliance, the Lee Kuan Yew University of Public Policy at the National University of Singapore, and GSMA for this opportunity to present child's rights perspective as part of the launch of the Digital Inclusion Benchmark. Congratulations for the report, the first of its kind, which will be instrumental really in driving companies towards better performance. As we heard already from Telstra, it's really great that we have good company here. It also represents the creation of a valuable source of data and analysis for comparison and to track progress going forward. Let me start with setting the scene on the link between children and digital technology. 1 in 3 internet users is a child, and more than 175,000 children go online for the first time each and every day. In East Asia and the Pacific, children are among the most active and influential users of new technology. Digital technology provides children with unparalleled opportunities to connect, to access, to share information and entertainment. The very same technology that provides them with so many benefits can also expose them to online harms, such as cyberbullying, loss of privacy, sexual abuse, and exploitation. These harms are really very real and felt by children around the world. For example, a regional study of UNICEF on children's use of social media from early 2020, we found that 7 out of 10 children reported that they had experienced something online that had upset them over the past year. 2 out of 5 noted that they had bad experience that they would not want to share or talk to anyone about. So now there is a lot that digital companies can do to create online environments that help children reap the benefits of the technology while also tackling the online harms. In 2020, the Eureport poll of 13,000 children from the ASEAN region, around 1/3 said that social media and internet companies have the biggest responsibility in protecting them online. So let's talk about this responsibility centered on the 4 areas, Lourdes, that you mentioned already. The first one is use, which involves online safety and the protection of personal data, both having critical child rights dimensions. Technology can intensify existing risks, such as sexual exploitation and bullying, and fuel also new forms of abuse. It is critical that platforms provide effective reporting mechanisms. These needs to be accessible in local languages and connected to child helplines and support services on the ground. Earlier this year, 2 young people from the Philippines opened the ASEAN Regional Conference on Child Online Protection. And they said that only 5% of children, that is 1 out of 20, say that they feel safe on the internet. What worries them is the most about using the internet is people having access to their data and personal information. Technology companies have rapidly become custodian of children's sensitive data related to their health, education, and social welfare. It's critical that children's personal data is protected from security breaches and from reuse for commercial purposes. So secondly, the access, connectivity, and meaningful access to digital technologies can be a game changer for some of the world's most marginalized children. The internet can break intergenerational cycles of poverty. It allows children to access information on issues that affect their communities and can give them a role also in helping to solve the issues of their community. Just yesterday, UNICEF and ITU published a report indicating that 2/3 of the world's school-age children don't have internet connection in their homes. So let me quote the UNICEF executive director. She said, "So many children and young people with no internet at home, that's more than a digital gap. It's a digital canyon." So the, the rationale for closing digital divides, including the gender digital divide, has never been starker or more urgent. And thirdly, Lourdes, you talked about skills, and these are critical to translating children's access to digital technologies into real opportunities. Children also need to be equipped with digital literacy skills to safely navigate the online world to enable them to benefit from all it has to offer. And lastly, your fourth point on innovation, there are boundless opportunities to create new digital tools to support children's rights. So as the benchmark outlines, technology has an important role to accelerate achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. Innovation should include respect for children's rights at its core, including appropriate privacy and safety principles by design. Over to you, Ed.
Thank you very much, Karin. Just a quick question for you. In light of the results of the benchmarking index, what are your calls to action for companies to ensure that the sector's transformation supports children's rights?
Yeah, so as the benchmark shows and your report shows, there are many examples of digital companies taking leadership on child rights issues, and these deserve recognition. So let me just go, I have 4 points that I would like to make. One is make children's rights as a core priority of your business. That's pretty easy. We see from the benchmark that only 16 of the companies assessed have an explicit high-level statement on child digital safety. And it's possible to urge companies to take a first step towards understanding how their business impacts children's rights can impact both positively and negatively. Second, two, play your part in keeping children safe from harms. This can take many forms, including cooperating with international or national authorities to report child online abuse. The benchmark shows that only 23% of companies actually are doing this currently. So in all cases, it's important to remember that all of children's rights must be upheld in the digital world, from the right to protection from violence to the right of freedom of expression and privacy. The third point, support children to fulfill their potential. Think about your business, what your business can do above and beyond in helping children thrive. In the benchmark, we see that 45 companies reported having programs supporting school connectivity, showing there's room for a lot more and much more action can be taken. 4, last but not least, reach out. The task of protecting and supporting children in a digital world is a shared responsibility involving individuals, parents, families, teachers, academia, as we see, as well as digital companies. Right now, according to the benchmark, only 30% of companies partner with third parties on mitigating child online harms. And maybe a final note, Ed, if I may, is UNICEF stands ready to support companies in their effort to improve their child rights impacts. For example, we have loads of tools and guidance designed to support companies in this field. And thanks again for having me. It's really been an inspiring 90 minutes. Thanks. Over to you, Ed.
Thank you again, Karen. Thank you for your service, for looking after the most vulnerable population. We have two more speakers. We have two more panelists. Our next speaker is Elizabeth Chungi. She's the new Executive Director for CSR, Diversity and Philanthropy, and Deputy Chair of the Orange Foundation. Orange is, as you know, is one of the largest telecom companies in the world. Over to you, Elizabeth.
Good morning for some, good afternoon for others. Thank you so much for your invitation. I am very pleased to be here and very proud to see that Orange stands on the podium. So digital inclusion has always been a top priority for us, as our mission is to connect people. Indeed, we have always been involved in digital inclusion since 2005 through the Orange Foundation, committed to fight illiteracy and to the education for girls in developing countries. This led, for example, to the creation of the Digital Center in 2015, where women can learn the basics, writing, arithmetic, computer skills, etc., and also train in technology. Over 40,000 women have been trained since 2015 in 3,000 women's digital centers across 23 countries in Africa, the Middle East, and Europe. Since then, within the Orange Group, each entity has its own approach for contributing to digital inclusion by simplifying access to connectivity and planning tomorrow's networks while maintaining our current global networks, creating and developing learning initiatives for using digital services, supporting entrepreneurships and startups, as well as promoting innovation. Our responsibility on the global transformation of the business model and of the world has increased in a moving context and with strong growing expectations from our stakeholders. In 2019, we have defined our purpose, which is, as a trusted partner, Orange gives everyone the keys to a responsible digital world. This purpose is in our bylaws. It is binding and fuels our strategy as reflecting in our new Engage 2025 strategic plan. We have a strong, very strong environmental and social commitments. On the social aspect, one of the key aspects is working towards digital equality. We want to improve inclusion by tackling the digital divide, because we think it's really one of our main responsibilities. I will just give you one example with one of our emblematic projects, which is the Orange Digital Centers program. In an Orange Digital Center, we provide free access to training for projects with coding classes and manufacturing workshops for prototypes, but we also help to tech startups with an accelerator. Orange Digital Centers really reflect our commitment for making digital and innovation accessible to everyone. 3 Orange Digital Centers are already open in Tunisia, Senegal, and Cameroon, and these centers will be rolled across all our operating countries by 2025, that is to say 32 Orange Digital Centers. Well, this is just an example of how digital inclusion is at the heart of what we do. But the first step towards digital inclusion is a network coverage. The densification of broadband coverage is critical to meet the growing needs digital of citizens and stakeholders in territories. The deployment of infrastructures, particularly in the most remote areas, requires ever greater innovation and adaptation, both in terms of technology and business models and partnerships in order to enable efficient and affordable network access that is financially accessible to all. And also, as just shared by Max Cavalier, the support of regulators. However, lack of coverage is only one part of the digital divide challenge. One of the main obstacles to getting people online is, as Lourdes reminded, their lack of resources and know-how. This is why Orange has launched an affordable smartphone, Sansa, which is being sold for around $35, a 4G Android smartphone, with an offer that includes calls, SMS messaging, and of course, data apps and information that can be accessed by voice in order to lower literary access barriers. Orange, as an operator, is not only a connectivity provider, but we have a multi-service strategy, and we provide adapted and essential services as well as internet access devices. And with access to digital technology comes access to essential and innovative services for education, for jobs, for information, for finance. And one striking example is mobile money. We launched in 2008 Orange Money, and since it has enabled millions of Africans excluded from traditional banking to deposit, withdraw, transfer, and make payments right from their mobile phone in a 100% secure manner. Other challenges in developing skills for digital inclusion include how to make sure children see the benefits of technology. And this is why we have developed the Super Coders workshops, which introduce kids from 9 to 13 to the basics of coding. And this program takes place across 20 countries now, and many Orange employees have volunteered for this coaching. And all of these programs really play in action of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Well, broadly, telecommunication and digital technologies are really tremendous providers of solutions in the overall achievement of the SDGs. They have a huge potential to benefit other key sectors such as transport, logistics, buildings, energy, that new generations of networks and AI will increase. It is really our social responsibility as a telco operator to pilot solutions for digital inclusion, as we really have to fight against inequalities. We want to make sure digital technology for the benefits of all, and that no one is left behind. And as said Max Cavalier, we can help to provide digital services, improving education and health. We can develop employment and business opportunities. Moreover, Orange as a tech. Do you hear me still?
Yes.
Okay. Just quickly.
Just to wrap up, I have one quick last question for you, if you don't mind, Elizabeth, in the interest of time. With the results of this, how can Orange utilize its leadership position in the benchmark to influence the transformation of the digital sector?
Well,
2 minutes, please.
Yes, very quickly. Orange is not only a network operator, but an end-to-end digital actor with a multi-service strategy to offer the best experience to our customers. We have strong commitments, but as Linda just said, we cannot make this transformation happen alone. The G20 Summit Leaders Declaration of Riyadh in 20 November 2000 acknowledged that universal, secure, and affordable connectivity is a fundamental enabler for the digital economy, as well as a catalyst for increasing growth, innovation, and sustainable development. And this really confirms that digital technology is essential and a driver for the SDGs. But we can just do this alone at Orange. So we are strongly committed to eradicate poverty and protect the environment, but we cannot achieve those objectives alone. This is why we chose the SDG 17 partnerships for the goals. And we need our partners, especially all SMEs and startups who contribute to the richness and dynamism of the digital ecosystem in France and internationally. Building an inclusive digital society is not the sole responsibility of a sector. It must be a collaborative action between telco operators, other digital players, and of course, governments also.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. We can sense your passion for the work that you do. Thank you. Our last speaker, certainly not the least, is Tan Jen Hui, who's the Global Head of Stewardship and Sustainable Investing for Fidelity International. My question to you, Jen Hui, is why is digital inclusion important to investors, and how can investors play a role in changing corporate attitudes and behavior? Over to you, please.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Harel. I'll endeavor to be brief because I think we're nearly at time. I think the first thing I would say is that it's quite clear that, while all of us have been impacted by this pandemic, that impact hasn't been equally distributed, right? And one of the legacies that we will have from this pandemic going forward is a widening inequality and a growing social divide. And I think one key area in which this inequality and social divide risks becoming permanently entrenched in our lives after COVID is within the digital world. And I think it's also clear that COVID has accelerated that pace of digitization of our lives as never before as well. And I think that's why, for us as investors, this work is particularly timely and important, because I think digital availability is going to become a leading indicator of a lot of the kind of educational, health, economic, and societal outcomes that we will have in the future. I think for investors, I identify three reasons why this benchmark is going to be incredibly helpful to us and why digital inclusion is very important. And the first and most obvious thing is that this sector is generally very well invested and very well liked by institutional investors. I think particularly the IT and software services sector, that, to use Lauder's most memorable phrase, needs to do the most adulting. And indeed, these companies are the ones that have driven the bulk of stock market performance this year. I think the second reason is that this pandemic has driven also a tectonic shift within the finance industry, and investors are focusing, as we have never before, on environmental, social, and governance issues within the companies that we invest in or that we lend to. And this is driven by, I think, two factors. Firstly, undoubtedly pressure from our clients, from large asset owners, but also I think increasingly the changing nature, I should say, of value creation by companies themselves. And so by that, what I mean is that I think there is growing recognition that long-term value creation by companies for their shareholders is increasingly going to be by driving short and medium-term value creation for your stakeholders. So in other words, your customers or your users, if you think those two things are different things, as they sometimes are in this sector, or for suppliers, or for employees, or for communities, and so on. And so I think what this calls for is really a new type of investment analysis, one that doesn't focus on looking at a company's short-term financial performance, but on examining what the clear drivers of a company's long-term success will be. And for technology companies, I think these are exactly the kinds of factors that are analyzed by this benchmark today, and why it is so important as investors that we integrate these findings into our investment processes. And the final point I'll make is around the nature of the companies themselves. So the speed of development of this industry is genuinely unprecedented in modern history. And I think the speed at which it has brought changes to society is equally unprecedented. And most of these changes, I should say, are positive, at least for those of us who are able to enjoy its benefits. And I think it's part of the nature of these companies that the successful companies become global very quickly. And the nature of the business models of these companies is that they become quite natural monopolies. And you add to that this pronounced management tendency of a lot of these companies to move fast and be quite aggressive to pursue growth or engagement or monetization. To us, the biggest risk as investors is around regulation and loss of trust from their user base. And that's why in our view as investors, these companies must be encouraged to self-regulate and quickly across a whole range of their global responsibilities. I think particularly around the issues of online welfare that Karin has correctly highlighted, the propagation of misinformation, the policing of content, data privacy, the use of ethics in algorithms, online fraud, and so on. I think fundamentally what we believe is that companies with this kind of global reach also have global responsibilities. And that responsibility is to manage your business in a way that is consistent with the objectives of society, which has now been formalized in the Sustainable Development Goals.
Thank you, Jenny. Before I let you go, one last question for you, if you don't mind. How do you respond to the results and findings of the index? And can you outline some concrete steps and recommendations for investors going forward?
So yeah, I think there are three key steps. The first I've already talked about, which is that I think this work is genuinely intellectually quite unique, because it looks at and it assesses the 100 companies on its list in a way which most people haven't really done. So I think leaving everything aside about the benchmark, I think this is a very important and differentiated piece of research that I think all investors would be very well advised to integrate into the way in which we do research and security selection for these companies. But secondly, I think importantly, investors really we're not just bystanders, right? As an industry, we're also the financiers of these businesses. We're either owners or lenders to these companies. And I think we have a responsibility to use our position to promote the best practices that we can at these companies, to engage with the management teams, using the findings of these benchmarks to inform the nature of our dialogue with them. And I think finally, one concrete step that we intend to do is to take this benchmark, take the findings, and build a collaborative engagement through the investment industry, partnering with like-minded investors to work with the companies that I've identified on this list and try and drive some of these practices that we talk about that will ultimately lead to a greater level of digital inclusion.
Okay, on that note, our time is up. Thank you very much, Jenwy. And I thank all the other members of the panelists for your time and sharing your thoughts. And we look forward to another round next year to see how this index has nudged the 100 players. Over to you, Lourdes.
Thanks, Professor Ed. As we said, keeping it short because we're running over. We end on a high note. Thank you, Jen, for that call to action in the end. We are really looking forward to working with investors like Fidelity International, who is really committed towards digital inclusion and driving positive digital transformation in the sector in which they invest in. So we look forward to that collaboration as well as growing that collaboration across a broader range of investors, whether they are already WBA allies or not. So we're very excited about that. And of course, next year, keep your eyes out on the progress of the performance of the 100 companies, becoming 150 companies, of course. But let's hope that the sector that needs the most adulting will see more growing up and maturity next year, more progress from their performance. So like, share, hashtag DIB 2020, and then explore the results online. Use the data and share it with your network. Thank you very much for joining us on behalf of the World Benchmarking Alliance. Thank you.